For years, the Soviet Union insisted that their nuclear reactors were the best in the world. Powerful, efficient, and completely safe. They believed that their technology was flawless, that the rules of physics could be bent by Soviet engineering, and that failure simply wasn't an option. Inside Chernobyl's Reactor 4, the engineers believed the same thing. So when strange warning signs began to appear, when alarms lit up the control panels again and again, they didn't panic. They didn't even worry. In fact, many of them laughed, because to them, the idea of a nuclear disaster was ridiculous, something that only happened in the West, something that propaganda told them would never happen here. But in the early morning hours of April 26, 1986, a disaster that could not happen was already unfolding, one wrong command at a time, and in just a few minutes, the world would hear a sound it was never meant to hear, a nuclear reactor exploding, the setup for failure. The night began like any other. Inside the control room, a young and inexperienced shift took over the panel. Most of them were barely out of technical school. Their job was to perform a routine safety test, a test meant to prove that Reactor 4 could survive a power loss. But things didn't go smoothly. Earlier in the day, the reactor's power dropped far below safe operating levels, a situation the RBMK 1000 reactor design could not handle. Every instrument told the same story. This reactor is unstable, it's unpredictable, it needs to be shut down. But the shutdown never happened. Why? Because Moscow demanded results, and their supervisor, Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, feared failure more than catastrophe. He ignored every warning. He forced his team to continue, and with each minute that passed, the reactor moved one step closer to a point of no return, the myth of Soviet perfection. The Soviet nuclear industry was built on a dangerous idea. Reactors do not explode. That belief wasn't based on science, it was based on pride. So when lights flashed red, when safety systems tried to shut the reactor down, the operators didn't question why. Instead, they turned the safety systems off, because in the USSR, a malfunction wasn't a sign of danger. It was an embarrassment, something to hide, something to silence. And that political mentality was about to have fatal consequences. A reactor that wanted to run away with the test underway. The reactor reached a state the designers had always feared. Power began rising rapidly. Steam pressure surged. The core became more and more reactive. Inside that sealed chamber was over 1,000 destructive bombs worth of energy, waiting for the smallest spark. And the spark would come from the engineers themselves. Because when they finally realized the machine was out of control, when panic finally replaced their confidence, they pressed a single button they truly believed would save them all, a Z5, the emergency shutdown, a button that should have saved the reactor, but would instead trigger the most destructive moment in nuclear history. 1:23 a.m. A sudden burst of light, a roar like a jet engine, metal tearing apart from unimaginable force, the floor shaking like an earthquake. Then, the unthinkable. A nuclear reactor exploded, not in a war zone, not from a weapon, but inside a peaceful Ukrainian power plant, in the largest country on Earth, where the government still swore such a thing was completely impossible. The cover-up begins. Within seconds, the engineers knew something had gone terribly wrong, but the Soviet system refused to accept it. Officials insisted, the reactor is intact. There is no radiation leak. It's only a fire. Even as radioactive chunks of the reactor core lay scattered around them, even as men collapsed from fatal exposure, even as the night sky glowed a deadly shade of blue, they clung to denial, because no one wanted to admit the truth. A Soviet nuclear reactor had blown itself apart and the world would never be the same again. When the dust settled from the explosions, the engineers stared in disbelief. The control room they once trusted now felt like the last place they should be. Every gauge was dead. Warning lights no longer flashed. Monitors displayed nothing but silence. Something impossible had just happened. And yet, some still denied it. Dyatlov shouted, "The reactor is fine! It cannot have exploded!" His voice was loud, but his eyes betrayed panic. He ordered a young engineer, Boris Stolyarchuk, to check the reactor firsthand. Stolyarchuk opened a door to the turbine hall and froze. The air radiated heat. Smoke swirled through the corridors. The sky glowed an unnatural blue from ionized radiation. This was no turbine fire. It was the open heart of a nuclear reactor, exposed to the world. As Stolyarchuk returned, Dyatlov demanded answers. "Report." "What did you see?" The engineer trembled. He wasn't sure what to say. Would anyone even believe it? He finally whispered, "The reactor, it's gone." But Dyatlov shook his head. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Chernobyl, make sure to subscribe for more, just like this one. He refused to accept reality. "Impossible. You're confused. Get back to your station in the Soviet system. Truth was often a punishment. Tonight would be no different. The firefighters arrive without protection." At 1:28 a.m., alarms reached the local fire brigade in Pripyat, but the message they received was simple. A roof is on fire. Nothing about nuclear danger, nothing about radiation. So the firefighters rushed in, wearing only cloth uniforms, no radiation suits, no masks. Upon arrival, they were met with burning graphite. To them, it looked like ordinary debris. They picked it up with their bare hands, not knowing it was nuclear core that could kill within hours. One firefighter turned to his partner and asked, "Why does this piece feel so heavy?" Seconds later, he dropped it, his skin already reddening. They had no idea the danger they faced. No one warned them. Because the authorities still insisted, there is no radiation. The first collapsed firefighter, Vladimir Pravyuk, felt his throat tighten. His skin burned where sparks touched it. His vision blurred. He sat down for a moment, thinking he might be tired. Then he collapsed. Others followed, vomiting, dizzy, unable to catch their breath. Their commander demanded ambulances. When the doctors arrived, they noticed a strange smell, metallic and sharp, the smell of radiation. Patients had reddened skin, blistered mouths, and swelling. The staff asked what caused it, but once again the official claim was, "It's just smoke inhalation." Even as men's hair fell out in clumps, even as their bodies trembled violently, the lie continued. The engineers began to suffer back inside the control room. Panic finally replaced confidence. Operators started to feel weak. A few vomited. One collapsed near the panel. Their exposure had begun the moment the core was exposed, but none of them understood the danger. They had been trained to believe their own invincibility. Engineer Leonid Toptunov, who had tried to prevent the disaster earlier, whispered, "We didn't know. How could we know?" His hands shook uncontrollably. He stared down at his skin, already flushed red. Reality could no longer be ignored. The men who once laughed at alarms were now paying the price for their certainty. The impossible had become undeniable. A city still sleeping. Just 3 kilometers away, in the city of Pripyat, families slept peacefully. Children dreamed. Alarm clocks waited to ring in a few hours. No sirens, no warnings, no evacuations. Outside, radioactive dust drifted over playgrounds. It clung to balconies, cars, cooked food cooling on kitchen windowsills. Residents who looked out their windows saw a glow over the plant. Beautiful, almost magical. Some walked onto their balconies to watch. Some gathered on a nearby railway bridge to enjoy the view. They didn't know they were breathing in the fallout. They didn't know the bridge would later be called the Bridge of Death. They had no idea that their city, the pride of the Soviet nuclear program, was already becoming uninhabitable, silencing the truth. When higher-ranking officials arrived, they demanded answers. "They say the reactor exploded," one report warned. But the leaders didn't want truth. They wanted loyalty. A senior Soviet official shouted, "You are spreading misinformation. Nuclear reactors do not explode." His anger wasn't fear, it was politics. If a Soviet reactor exploded, it meant the system had failed. It meant someone had to take the blame, and blame in the Soviet Union often ended careers, or worse. So the official report remained unchanged. Fire at Chernobyl. Minor fuel damage, no radiation risk. Those lies would cost thousands their lives, and they would delay critical rescue operations for many hours. Hours the world could not afford to lose. The world begins to notice by morning, hospitals were filling. Ambulance after ambulance arrived with victims, firefighters, operators, soldiers. Doctors struggled to understand why their patients were deteriorating so quickly, while officials still insisted, "It is all under control." But Chernobyl's secrets could not stay hidden. Hundreds of miles away, a nuclear plant in Sweden detected a massive spike in radiation. The fallout was already spreading across Europe. Swedish authorities demanded answers from Moscow. What had happened? But the Soviet response was the same command given to the control room that night. There is no problem. That denial would shatter within hours, and the Soviet Union would be forced to reveal the truth it tried so hard to bury. As radiation spread across Europe, foreign governments demanded the facts. Scientists detected fallout hundreds of miles away. The world already knew Chernobyl had exploded, but inside the Soviet Union, admitting the truth was still considered disloyal. Finally, facing international pressure, Soviet officials held a press conference. They claimed that a small accident occurred at the Chernobyl plant. "It is under control." That statement was a lie. The situation was anything but under control. The liquidators, a human shield against the truth. The Soviet leadership understood one thing clearly. If they didn't stop the radioactive fires, half of Europe could become a dead zone. So they sent thousands of soldiers, miners, pilots, and plant workers, later known as the liquidators, into the most dangerous place on Earth. They were told the exposure would be minimal. They were told not to worry. They were told their country needed them. Many believed they would survive. Many didn't. But none were allowed to speak publicly about what they saw. Not then. Not for years. Because Chernobyl was no longer just a disaster. It had become a state secret. Evacuation. Too late. It took 36 hours before the first evacuation order was given. Dozens were already critically ill. Tens of thousands had been exposed. Buses lined the streets of Pripyat. Residents were told to bring essentials for just 3 days. 3 days. That was another lie. Nearly all of them would never return home. Their lives, their city, their entire history, abandoned forever. The Bridge of Death crowds who had watched the blue glow earlier that night, those who stood on the train bridge, had unknowingly absorbed a lethal dose. Families, neighbors, children. Most of them began showing severe symptoms within days. Radiation poisoning does not discriminate, and it does not wait, yet no monument stands where the bridge once did, because acknowledging what happened there means acknowledging the failures that led to it. Hospitals overrun, and investigators silenced in Moscow, special hospitals filled with victims. Doctors struggled to save lives, but the damage was too deep. Some patients asked what happened, others begged to see their families. And a few, when they understood the truth too late, asked only one question: why did they lie to us? Soviet investigators tried to ask the same thing, but they were blocked, threatened, or told that certain details were not to be written down. It was easier to blame operator error. Easier to point at a few men in a control room than admit a system-wide failure that started long before that night. The global fallout. In the end, the explosion released more radiation than both atomic bombs dropped in World War II combined. Yet the official Soviet death toll still claims just 31 people died. But independent studies tell a different story. Thousands, tens of thousands, possibly far more. Cancer cases spiked across Eastern Europe. Entire regions became unlivable. Generations still deal with the consequences, but the most dangerous part of the story remains. Even today, we do not know the full truth. Records were destroyed, data was buried, scientists were silenced, reports were altered. Anything that could reveal how deep the failures went was hidden away. Unanswered questions. Why were so many warnings ignored? Why were the safety systems disabled? Why was the public kept in the dark? And why does the official death toll remain so impossibly low? Every question leads back to the same source: a government that believed secrecy was safer than honesty. Chernobyl wasn't just a technological disaster, it was a political disaster, a scientific disaster, and a human disaster all at once. To admit what really happened would mean admitting that the entire Soviet system was built on denial, and denial caused the reactor to explode long before the core ever did. A warning carried into the future. Today, the remains of Reactor 4 rest beneath a massive steel structure called the New Safe Confinement, a tomb designed to last 100 years. But what lies beneath is still deadly, and the questions remain buried with it. Chernobyl is not just a story of the past, it is a warning to the present, because any time a system ignores the truth, laughs at the warnings, and chooses secrecy over safety, the results can be catastrophic. And at 1:23 a.m., the world learned that a reactor is not the only thing that can explode. Lies can explode too.